It's been a really, really cool time so far, and it's awesome to be back in Marae. I'm really feeling the energy and the spirit here, and it's also always a choice to see your faces again. I'm not going to be talking to you about how we need to reform our drug policies, but it is related to our next speaker, which is Dr. Schep. And yeah, he's a pretty top bloke. Well, I've had a few conferences in Hui's where Leo has spoken, and he always comes with the science, so man, he'll drop knowledge for sure, and keep him on his toes and ask questions. What does that mean in our language? And he'll be able to break that down for sure. So Leo is a toxicologist. He works for the National Poison Centre. You would have seen him a lot maybe. He gets a lot of media interviews as well when it comes to this subject matter especially. He's been there for almost 15 years. So I guess you can tell what your role, you can tell everyone what your role encompasses, so we can get a bit of a feel, but make him feel welcome. It's pretty choice, he's sat in with us for this whole time so far, so big ups Leo, thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you. I feel honoured to come onto this marae. I have been on marae before, and it is a privilege, and thank you very much. What I'd like to talk about to you today is psychoactive substances. I'll start with the history, go back to the days of BZP, benzodiazepine. Who remembers benzodiazepine? I've always asked that question. Quite often I'm speaking to communities or whatever, and I ask them, and not many hands go up. We seem to have a short memory span, or maybe we're inundated with the media all the time and we forget what happened last week as opposed to what happened today. I'm with the University of Otago, National Poison Centre. That building there, I've spent most of my career in that building. 13 years in the School of Pharmacy, where I did my PhD, and 15, almost 16 years at the Poison Centre. So most of my career is built in that building, and I hate to be in an earthquake. I don't like that building, especially an earthquake. When an earthquake goes, you can hear it creaks like a ship. It's not nice. So, as I said, what I'm here today to talk to you about designer drugs, particularly around synthetic cannabinoids, but I'll also touch on huffing, because as you know, it's been in the media for the last 2 days, and Phil Cruz was here yesterday interviewing us about that, and TV1 and Murray News last night. So, as I said, I'll be talking about I like to call it the pioneer psychoactives. All right? Benzodiazepine, trifluoromethylphenylpiperazine. These were the drugs in the early 2000s. These were the herbal highs that were safe. Not. Then we've had the synthetic cannabinoids. We know all about that. We've all seen it. You guys are the front end at the coalface. We touch on the coalface at the Poison Centre. We provide poison information in New Zealand. And we got a lot of calls on synthetic cannabinoids. And I think the month before it was banned, finally, in May 2014, we took 70 calls that month. 70 calls. Last month, we took 4 calls. So you'll see the stats in a minute on that. And so I'd like to touch on the clinical effects, the Psychoactive Substance Act, the future, where we're going, and I'm not that fussed about the future at the moment with the changes that were put in the amendments in the Act in 2000 in May of this year. And in the future, I'd like to touch on huffing, all right? Alternatives to synthetic cannabinoids. This is something I quite often present in conferences and that. A report by the United Nations Office on Drug and Crime in 2011. And what they were saying in that report, it's a summary of what's going on in the world with drugs and abuse. And they're saying that the rate of use, the number of users per year, or the rate of use of your traditional drugs, if you like to call them that, in the good old days, if you like to call them that as well, things like marijuana, things like LSD, like opioids, etc., the rate of use is stabilised. So there might be, for example, 200 million users. It's not increasing. What they have identified, though, were designer drugs. And these are drugs that are rapidly changing and appearing in our market to circumvent the laws of any given country. Okay? And they identified 3 groups: the piperazines, the mephedrone, and synthetic cannabinoids. Now, we saw the piperazines, it's benzopiperazine and trifluoromethylphenylpiperazine. We haven't seen mephedrone. These are your bath salts. MDP, methylene dioxide, pyrovalerone, mephedrone, and a whole host of other ones. And the reason we haven't seen them in New Zealand, because they were successfully covered by the Misuse of Drug Act, Section B, I think, which said cathinone, which was banned in 1981, Cathinone was banned in any analogues, and then you can successfully argue that these are analogues of cathinone, so we didn't see them. And the odd time they do rear their ugly head in the country, if you dig into the incidents, and the police sometimes keep me informed, not always, they keep me informed what's going on. There was a case in Auckland about 2 years ago where a guy ran amok and was tearing off windscreen blades off cars, and they had to taser him to subdue him. It turned out he'd come straight from the mines in Australia and brought it with him. So we're not seeing much of that in New Zealand, but of course we know we've seen a lot of that, the synthetic cannabinoids. So this is what the United Nations Office of Drug and Crime are reporting and predicting what we're going to see in the future. And these aren't the only groups, but they're the three major groups that the United Nations had identified. So let's start with benzopyrazine. I won't bore you with too much chemistry, but as I said to my group once, you know how some guys go to Playboy magazine, see the interview, they go, the picture? Well, I always go to the chemical structures in a scientific paper, I always like reading them. So there we go, very simple molecule, 6-member ring with 2 nitrogens in it, it's a pyrazine molecule. And basically that's the basis of those herbal highs, all right? So 3 of the most common ones are benzopyrazine, trifluoromethylphenylpyrazine, and one which we didn't see in New Zealand. I went through all our calls at the Poison Centre for the last 10 years to see if we had any calls in this one here, and we only had one call that said, oh, here's a problem in Europe, is it a problem in New Zealand? So this one has appeared in Holland particularly. It was a replacement of ecstasy at one stage when they couldn't get the precursors to make ecstasy because the law enforcement agencies managed to successfully block that, so they went to other drugs like this particular one here. But these ones here, they flooded our market. I think, was it? I don't remember what it was now. It was around in the millions of tablets per year they were selling at one stage. So the events in New Zealand, they were promoted by the industry as a safe alternative to hard drugs such as methamphetamine. Well, excuse me, any drug is safer than methamphetamine, really, when you think about it. The only one that's not, the only one would be on the same par as that would be cocaine. But methamphetamine is a nasty drug. I wrote a review paper on that with a couple of colleagues in a toxicology journal called Clinical Toxicology, and I was gobsmacked at the toxicology of methamphetamine. You know, amongst the psychoactive effects and the psychotic effects, it balls up your cardiovascular system. That's what it does. It balls up your cardiovascular system. And we're not talking overnight, we're talking about chronic use over time. You know, people have heart attacks, people have strokes, you know, blow out their blood vessels. Because what it does is it weakens the blood vessel. And if you look with appropriate technology, you can see balloons because the blood vessel is weakened. All right? And we call it vasculitis. And that's because of chronic use of synthetic cannabinoid, of methamphetamine. So any drug is safer than methamphetamine. And here we go, this is my statistic there. Sold as dietary supplements since 2002. They said it was they said it was from black pepper, piperidine. But no, it's not, it's piperazine. And that extra nitrogen, that ring I showed you before, makes a big difference. So you go from something you get in black pepper, which you just onto your chop or your meat, to something that's sold that has psychoactive effects. And in that time frame, the industry claimed they skited in the New Zealand Herald. 26 million tablets were sold. You go, holy moly. I didn't take any, my kids didn't take any. Who got my share? So a survey was done. The suggestion of that survey was that those at 20 to 24 years of age at the height, they reckoned that 40% of men of 20 to 24 years of age had used BZP in 2006. 40%. That's a huge one. And we got a lot of calls, we'll come back to that in a minute, on that. And it was made illegal finally in 2008 when the government suddenly woke up and paid attention and said, shit, we've got a problem here. It took them 5 years. And I know research that was done in Christchurch, a colleague of mine, Paul G, and we'll come back to a study in a minute, which was published in 2005, which clearly showed that its toxic effects. But it took the government another 3 years to finally sit up and pay attention. But the most important thing, or the worst thing of all, if you like, was that attitudes in some sectors of society changed. What do you mean by that? In the good old days, if you like to call them that, of course, if you want to get marijuana, you had to go to Tinny House, or somebody who's dodgy to buy it off, right? You go to BZP, you go to your dairy. You go to your dairy and buy. Think about that for a minute. A dairy is a shop that provides a service in the community for over 100 years, all right? And you buy into that goodwill when you buy that dairy, so you may pay so much for the dairy and so much extra for the goodwill that's been established, the community trust between the dairy and the community. So that shop that has that trust in that community is selling something that is of harm to the community. And that's why it changed society, because people thought it's legal, I can buy it from a dairy when I buy some milk, therefore it's got to be good for me and safe. And so we had swathes of people in our society whose attitudes changed because of the accessibility from somebody we trusted. I gave a talk in Timaru last year, and I hammered that point. And the dairy owner came up, he was an Indian guy, came up and he bawled his eyes out and apologised to the community. It was a community meeting. And I must admit, confession time, my reaction was crocodile tears. But I found out afterwards why he was so upset was his father had been selling them, and a guy came in and wanted it, wouldn't give it, so he had a slug and shot him, and the pellet lodged between his eye. And that was a wake-up call to this owner of the shop, that maybe it wasn't a good idea to sell these drugs. So, you know, buying it from a community, from a dairy, you're buying it from somebody you trust. You know, it puts the whole idea of trust on its head. And that's what I mean by attitudes in some society towards drugs have changed. And they say, oh, it's quite a safe drug. Well, I would regard it as quite a dirty drug. It's not in the same league as methamphetamine, but there have been a couple of cases in Christchurch where they pulled them back from death a couple of times. I know, the colleague keeps me informed of what had informed me at the time what was happening. So this is a typical scenario in the day, because they're gone now, night of exposure, they had unintentional overdose, or what the industry perceived as of a therapeutic dose. I mean, how do they know what a therapeutic dose was? They started with 50 milligrams, and within a couple of years they see the therapeutic dose is 500 milligrams. You think, well, make up your mind. And how do you know this? Oh, I give it to my friends, and if they don't react, we regard that as a therapeutic dose. So basically, they're taking doses which were perceived to be therapeutic. They had their 2 or 3 hours of good time, then they had the hangover, which would last for 3 days. Things like agitation, anxiety, can't get sleep, headache, vomiting, increased heart rate, hypertension, jaw clenching, chest pain. Look, I've lost count how many calls we got from doctors ringing up, and we could finish the sentence for the doctor. I have a patient who took BZP on Saturday night, this is a Tuesday now, and you could just about finish the sentence off for him of what the symptoms were and the persistence of those symptoms. And they said, what do we do? We said, well, I don't know, just treat them symptomatically, supportively, and pray for them, do something, I don't know. And they should come right. And quite often the student would say, you know, typically a student, not always a student, oh, I'll never do this again. Did that many times. So basically, it wasn't a nice drug. If we look at this here, for example, this is what Paul G, he did a study in Christchurch. It seems to have hit Christchurch pretty hard. You guys from Christchurch, did you see BZP today? Much of BZP? Yeah, Christchurch seemed to have hit pretty hard. He did a study where he recruited patients coming into the ED department, and this is what he came up with. And he published this in BMJ, look, 2005. Sweating, hyperventilation, increased breathing, palpitations. But look, seizures. 18% of patients turning up at Christchurch ED had a seizure. All right? And that was in 2005, and it was till 2008 before the government finally banned it. I said to Paul all the time, Paul, why did you publish in the New Zealand Medical Journal? Why don't you go for a top journal like Lancet or NEJM or JAMA or something? And he said, I did it deliberately for that journal so we get maximum press attention to try and influence the government with their attitude towards this drug. So, BZP, legally available, we think, for 8 years, we're not sure. It changed the culture and set the stage, changed the culture for drugs and set the stage for synthetic cannabinoids. It causes amphetamine-like effects, but it's not a safe alternative for any psychoactive drug. So this is, as I said, this is the precursor to before we came into the synthetic cannabinoids. You've seen those packets, I'm sure you have, in your community. A couple of these were pulled off the street, my kids in my hometown in Mosgiel, and a couple we got from our study in patients who we enrolled in Christchurch and emergency departments. What are the events in New Zealand? We think, again we're not sure, we think it had been in New Zealand before 2010. Flying low under the radar screen, and you had your die-hard drug user who would be using it, and apart from that, there wasn't much evidence of any other use in the country. And October 2010, there was a report done by Campbell Live with Tristan Clayton, where he went out and smoked it. Do you remember that one? Yeah, everybody remembers that story. And he sat down and he had a feed, and then he got stoned, and he went back and tried to do the story, and he was completely out of it. Everyone thought it was a great joke, ha 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 ha. Well, that changed the whole culture in New Zealand. Suddenly New Zealanders said, oh my gosh, there's a new drug on the market, we can try it out. And when he came to interview me, I took the opportunity, politely and respectfully, to have him on about it. I said, do you realise your story changed the mindset of New Zealanders towards this drug? He said, funny you should say that, Leo. I said, why is that? He said, well, after I did that story, people from the industry were ringing me up for weeks after saying, great story, mate. Our sales have gone through the roof. And you think, oh, that's good, that's good. And when I explained it to him, articulated it to him, he was horrified. And he, to his credit, he's a nice guy actually, to his credit, he's made an effort since then to set the record straight on synthetic cannabinoids. And he talked about how he had this huge headache, etc. And he came down to Dunedin to interview myself because it was a problem at one stage in Mosgiel. Why Mosgiel? Why not any other town? I don't know. It's my hometown. And he set the record straight in that story, which I thought was good. So that's when it first came in our radar screen in October 2010. I didn't know what it was. I had to go to PhD students in the Department of Pharmacology. What is this stuff? And so they explained it all to me, and then I said, well, that's it. I'm going to bat. That's why I'm here today as a result of that. I'm going to bat. We're not going to have a fiasco as we had with the with BZP. The Law Commissioner report, the psychoactive substance, came out in April 2011. And then, as a result of that, we had an amendment to the bill, to the Misuse of Drug Act, allowing the minister unprecedented powers to identify various analogues and ban them. Okay, so ESR would pick it up, put it through their MSPEC, they would identify what it was, they'd tell the minister, he would ban them and add them to the Gazette. And that went on for 24 months until July of 2013. Now, the trouble was, the industry knew that. And so they knew they had a shelf life of 2 or 3 months of any given analogue. So they put one on the market, knowing it would only last 3 months, and while that was on the market, 2 more would be prepared for the market. So you had one on the market, 2 ready to replace it. And it got to the stage in New Zealand where we were advanced probably in any other country in the world in the synthetic cannabinoids. I had somebody from the Dutch government ring me up about a month ago saying, we've just done a bust, and we're going to take them to court, can you help us? I said, oh yeah, sure, I'll help you. What drug was it? They told me the analogues that they identified, and I fell off my chair laughing. I really did. I said, they said, well, why? I said, well, we saw that 3 years ago, those drugs, and they're just now turned up in Holland. So we were so advanced in what was available in our dairies that other countries are still catching up. Okay? These analogues. So there's the calls to the Poison Centre, to give you an idea. October 2010, that's when we came in our radar screen, got a couple of calls, probably due to the press attention, dissipated. August 2011, the amendment to the Misuse of Drug Act kicked in. Calls dropped away. I thought we'd nailed it. I really thought we'd nailed it. I wrote a letter with a couple of colleagues to the New Zealand Medical Journal saying, yes, we've done it. And the minister quoted us, you know, how do you know, Minister, that it's working? Oh, Dr. Schep, the National Poison Centre, showed us that it's gone away. Well, that was great. And then it took off, didn't it? I was so embarrassed. I wrote another letter to the Medical Journal saying, it's back, sorry. And they just kept going, those calls, increasing. July 2013 was the point where the Psychoactive Substance Act kicked in. Okay, and we had that interim period while they put the regulatory process in place, and 41, or over 41, I think it was 4150 analogues, or products I should say, were allowed to have temporary licenses on the market. And during that time frame, just by looking at the calls of the Poison Centre, they just kept going up. And as I said, 70 calls, and that was in April. Why that spike there? We got a lot of attention, press attention at that time. I think that was a result of that massive public attention. That's why we increased calls. And so you can see there from that, the history, based on the calls of the Poison Centre, of the use in New Zealand. It's not the best, but it's the best we've got. And then after the ban and the amendment to the Act made in 2014, they just dropped away. And we got 2 calls, it was 4 calls in September, and 8 calls in October. Yeah. So what are they? They're artificially created chemicals. They're designed to understand, I've been keeping on the time, what goes on in the brain of a rat. These analogues, which were CD1, CD2 receptors, okay? That's one that marijuana interacts with, that's where our natural cannabinoids interact with. They're typically involved in maintaining balance in our brain, okay? And they discovered these about 10, 15 years ago, or maybe 20 years ago, and they designed chemicals to lock into those parts of the brain and understand what's going on, because there'll be an adverse reaction of the rat, and they write it down, and they say, okay, that reaction occurred because of that analog. Build a picture from there. The trouble was they went straight from the lab onto the street. Straight from the lab, where they were locking into the brains of rats on the street, which locking into the brains of people in New Zealand. Okay? And I've lost count of school kids, I've talked to probably 10,000, and I say to them, there are only 2 people in this country that benefit from you taking these drugs. And they go, oh yeah, who are they? I said, well, the first is the industry. Oh yeah, we know that. The second one is me. They go, what? Well, you get unwell, you go to the hospital, we recruit you, we publish results, I get a promotion. And that was a deliberate ploy to try and lock into their brains, and we know, sweet, very little about these drugs. Very little at all. So they're not marijuana, but they're more toxic than marijuana, and they interact the same parts of the brain as marijuana. There's a gentleman who created them, John W. Huffman. These are the series that were set in New Zealand. It's not the only series, but it's a major series in New Zealand. This is the granddaddy of them all, JH 18. That was the one they identified in Holland a few months ago. And he created hundreds of these suckers. And some are more potent and some are less potent than THC, which is your structure there. And this is the reason why they got in the market. THC and any analogues of THC are banned. You don't need to be a synthetic chemist to realise that's not similar to that structure at all. And that's how they got in the country. Simple as that. This particular one was twice as potent as marijuana. We were talking about somebody yesterday about white rhino. White rhino was 47 times more potent than marijuana. Right? And that was legal. Right. And to give you an idea, don't get too flummoxed by this structure, just treat it as Lego. Right? Okay, the idea of the changes, these chemicals that are going on there. There's your granddaddy there. The green is just what we call a naphthyl ring there, naphthyl oil. You chop that off and you add that group on it. You chop that one off, you add that one. These are all different groups that can be added there onto that structure, right, to give you a psychotropic effect. Okay? That's not even thinking about the indole ring here, which can be changed by indazole, etc. And then you add a fluorine there, or a methyl group there, etc. The point I'm trying to show you is that the combination and permutation of analogues that you put on the market to circumvent the law, to give you your high, is just astounding. Alright? And so this gives you an idea of that. Now, every one of those groups have appeared in molecules that have been sold in your dairies in the last 3 years. Every one. Okay. Gives you an idea. And people say, well, why don't you just ban it? Well, it's not that simple. Just ban it, a chemical. You have to define that structure. And they say, okay, let's take it down to a basic level and ban it. Okay, here's JH18. Let's ban every chemical that's got that indole group there. That's fine until you realise, well, actually, it's a chemical in your brain. It has the same structure. Then the one you want to go to America, and you go to your pharmacist, you get some melatonin. That's got that structure. Now look at this between these two. You don't have to be a chemist. I won't label you with any more chemistry, okay? Promise. But if we take that methyl group off there, one of those groups, and put it there, we go from one that helps you when you travel to the United States for your conference to one that'll kill you. Just by changing one methyl group. So you can see the problem, can't you? This is 5-methoxydimethyltryptamine, and the case reports overseas, they kill. Look at the difference between the two of them. How are you going to ban that by defining the basic chemical structure compared with melatonin, or that which circulates in your body? Very difficult. So it's not as simple as banning them. So what are the symptoms? Aware at the time. These are the symptoms rank order, which we have seen, and based on peer-reviewed literature, and the most common ones: rapid heart rate, vomiting, agitation, psychosis, hallucinations, paranoia, seizures. They tell me, you know, that in the ED, they say, Leo, if you're in the ED, they're being treated, they're reaching out to things that aren't there. You think, oh, that's pretty cool. They're hearing things that aren't there, that's pretty cool, until, what are those voices? These voices aren't pretty voices. These are nasty, evil voices saying, kill yourself, kill your friend, etc., etc. Which leads to things like suicidal thoughts. I know of a number of deaths in New Zealand, including my hometown, where people have committed suicide as a result of smoking these drugs. So you've got a whole lot of neuropsychiatric effects that can occur by taking these. And some of these people say, well, I've been doing this for 2 years and I'm fine. Well, okay, you're lucky. But the next one, you may experience that. You increase the risk of experiencing that. Now this is a slide I put together for the school kids. It's a lovely pretty slide. I won't bore you with too much of the details. But this is where these drugs interact in the body. And you see areas like movement and complex coordination, like signing your name. Breathing and heart rate function. It maintains these functions in your body. Body temperature, no problem whatsoever. Emotions and memory, thought, reasoning, memory, consciousness. What I try and get across to the kids is that by taking these drugs, you are changing. You run the risk of changing your perception of society. You run the risk of changing your perception of society, and we call that psychosis. You know, your friend who come up to talk to you, suddenly you don't see him as your friend anymore. You see somebody who's going to have to kick the crap out of you, so I'll get him first before he gets me. It's all locked up in their brain because their perception of who their friend is has been changed due to the chemicals they've been taking. All right? There's a paper that was published in the New Zealand Medical Journal last year. I'm telling Charlie because I wrote the introduction, that's all. But basically what it was 162 admissions into the acute psychiatric ward from January to April 2013. 13% of those who were admitted had taken synthetic cannabinoids. 13%. So that's an added burden over and above the patients they normally treat. And Paul Blue divided into 3 groups. They had suicidal thinking, we talked about before, psychoses, and what they call affective symptoms such as anxiety and depression. I've talked to kids who suffer long-term anxiety issues now, okay, where they need medication and they need to see a doctor on a regular basis. So these are the sort of things that can occur. Paul also divided 3 groups. Those who had a history of psychoses, those who had a history of mental disorders but not psychoses. But the scary 3rd group was those who had no history of mental health illnesses whatsoever. Hello, our head in the corner.
Can you prove a causal relationship between someone who was non-symptomatic to developing affective?
It's going to take time. Yeah. There is we'll come to that in a minute. Marijuana, you know, if you smoke marijuana, it's been clearly shown that you've got a 1/9 chance increase of by smoking. These have only been in the market for 2 years. You need a generation to do that. That's what's scary about these drugs. We just don't know.
But is the correlation that you can
based on the case series, and particularly of the American military, you know, guns and drugs don't mix, you know? And there's been a lot of research in the American military with this, particularly around psychosis. I think it's quite clear, but it will take time through, you know, longitudinal studies, etc., to do that. But there is a link there. To prove it effectively will take a long time. So basically, you've got long-term psychiatric risks, increased risk of psychosis, paranoia, greater than marijuana, because remember they interact with the same parts of the brain as marijuana. And marijuana has a loose association with those parts of the brain. We call that a partial agonist, whereas synthetics lock and load, as I call it, the students and other groups I talk to. Another, if you're a pharmacologist, it's a full agonist. Okay, and so you're thinking if there's a risk smoking marijuana that has a loose association in your brain, how much greater is that risk with synthetic cannabinoids? It's a question we can't answer yet, but I think we get a sort of broad brushstroke overall impression of what the risks are. And these can influence our brains severely, more permanently I should say, particularly those who are at risk. We know, we said before, the risk between smoking marijuana as a youth and adult psychosis, we all know about that. How much greater is synthetic cannabinoids? I can't say definitively, but I suspect it's going to be greater. Look at the ages of the users, and you can do the overlap as any drug overuse. The age of risk, 16 to 20, that's when the peak is. You can see that anyway. And then they drop away and you get the drama as my age would take it. But that's the sort of mean age where people are at risk who take these things, try them out because they're young and they know better than their parents, etc., etc. Remember, we were like that once. So the oldest person, I think, in our study was 68. The youngest was 9. But mainly, predominantly between 16 and 20. Then we have the withdrawal effects. We've got the addiction effects, we have the withdrawal effects. And these are sort of symptoms from a German paper which summarise it quite nicely. Depressed and desperate, I love that. You tell the German wrote that paper. Okay, unrest, sweating, tremors, increased heart rate or heart beating, heart normal, insomnia, headache, diarrhea, meals and vomiting. I lost count how many calls of poisoning we had where people would try to get off that and suffer these effects. And these effects can go on for weeks in some cases, months in some cases, but others they get off it within a weekend. but others don't. I mean, I've talked to mothers who've had sons who've been trying to get off for 3 months and can't get off it, and they literally end up banging their head against the wall. And the only thing that relieves the symptoms is smoking again. And this one particular case from down south where the son went back to smoking, he now has psychiatric effects, permanent probably. And so you've got the withdrawal effects. Which now brings me to the Psychoactive Substance Act. Don't you love that picture? I use it all the time. That came out of the Economist in the UK. A friend sent me that picture, so I used it without permission. July 2013. The bill wanted to prove low risk before a drug can be put on the market. That was the intention of the bill, all right? And so the requirements were laid out. You had quality assurance issues, and so why is that? Well, what they were doing was they were getting plant matter like Damiana, and they had a bucket of synthetic cannabinoids that was dip in the bucket, dry, chop it and sell it. You don't know from one batch to the next. One might be 10, an order of magnitude greater concentration in that batch. And you talk to some people who say, oh, I smoked, nothing happened, then I had a batch and whoa, I was with the theories. And so that's probably because of the dose. The dose is a lot greater. There's no mechanism to assure that the dose on any particular product you buy is consistent. If I buy paracetamol, I'm pretty confident that's 500 milligrams. I'm not confident in those synthetic cannabinoids in the plant matter, sprayed on the plant matter, I should say. So they'd have to prove good manufacturing processes. Preclinical toxicology data that meets animal testing, for those of you who didn't miss the point. Clinical trials on humans from animal studies, and you can establish a dose acceptable for humans. And then you risk assess the product, and then there was market surveillance, such as the poison cert, any departments, that sort of thing. And that was the intent of the bill. It went through a lot of chopping and change, as we all know, and eventually it kicked in July. And part of the initial requirements was an R18, restricted sale outlets, so it went out of dairies, thankfully. Label and packaging requirements, no advertising. All products must have a health warning, including the phone number of the National Food Centre. And I was counting the calls we got from people ringing up saying, I'd like to tell you, I smoked your product and it's crap. And we say, no, it wasn't our product, we're the National Food Centre. I don't care, your product's crap. And some staff at work would just glare at me if it was my fault. So there you go. And that's one of the reasons why our calls increased. So then we went through a transitions phase where the bill came into being and then all the regulatory processes had been established so to check and to make sure that people who want to apply for licences, they've gone to tick the right boxes, develop practical testing, etc., and all the legislation associated with that. And that time frame, that gap, that interim period got longer and longer and longer and longer. And now they tell me it's going to be December of 2015 before they finally got them into place. So we got that transition period, and establishers in the meantime who trade those products could apply for a licence, and they said there's 170 retail outlets in the day, because I know they're gone now, down from what they thought was about 3,000. And 41 products in February this year had interim approval, and 12 products had their licences removed. But there's a lot of confusion. I won't go to spend too much time on the slide. All I'm trying to say in that slide is there's a lot of confusion, and we were the receiving end of a lot of confusion. They're supposed to write in the packets what was in them. Sometimes they didn't even write in the packet what was in them. And ring the Ministry of Health. Do you know what's in them? Yes, we know. Then why aren't you telling the public, and why aren't you telling us? Okay, they reinterpreted the drug laws. This particular one was illegal. They made it legal, and that's the one you found. Similar one to that one found in White Rhino. Okay. So there was a lot of confusion around that time frame, and we were at the receiving end of some of that confusion. And then, in May this year, panic stations, because a lot of mayors were getting upset, and then MPs and marginal seats were getting worried about their seats, and that outcry went to Wellington, and the government conducted a U-turn over legal highs after concerns from national MPs. And this is what it said in the Dominion Post. Legislation passed last year did not go far enough. All products with initial approval were then banned, and full implementation of the bill was delayed until late 2015, and then animal testing was prohibited. Now, I'm not going to spend much time on animal testing. I can spend half an hour on it. You haven't got the time because I want to talk about solvent abuse, but sufficient to say, take animal testing out, you can't prove low risk. There you go. Come see me afterwards and ask me further if you like. So, the psychoactive substance, the future. Prove low risk was a world first. A lot of countries in the world have followed us like a hawk. Public concerns about animal testing. It was banned in May 2015 and compromised and proved low risk. And I got grumpy and I published a letter in the British Medical Journal on that with a couple of colleagues, expressing our concerns. But we'll have to wait till the end of next year to find out whether our concerns were founded or ill-founded. Now this is the last thing I'd like to talk about with the limited time I've got left is what, quarter now, 10 minutes? 10 minutes? How much time have I got left? 5 minutes. Oh, please. Alright, basically let's talk about what are they going to replace with? Solvent abuse. Let's go through that quickly. Huffing. Okay, let's like to touch on huffing for a minute, okay? Based on, you know, what happened in Auckland yesterday. There we go, three suffered burns and gas explosion, huffing explosion here in Auckland yesterday. Now these are some of the deaths that have occurred in New Zealand in the last 10 years. I've just given you a cross-section of some of the cases of deaths, people who have died in New Zealand through huffing propane-butane. We've had over 65 deaths. The coroner in 2030 recognised 63, there's been a number of deaths since then. Now this particular one here is of interest to me because that kid was in my son's class. Alright? And he would just go to the back shed and just huff every night, just quick huff. One day they found his body. Alright? That was changed successfully. And deleted. Butane was really available, the most commonly abused volatile inhalant in New Zealand, and its use carries a significant risk of death. There was a forensic pathologist said in December of 2011 based on yet another coroner's case report on it. Alright? Really available, most common cause of death. Between 2000 and 2012 there were 63 deaths, 55 of the deceased were under 24 years of age, 49 of the deaths were male, Maori, the highest number at 30. Alright, 30 out of 63 years, almost half the deaths were that group. And this is put out by the Judge McLean, Office of the Chief Coroner, and we published a report called Case Study of Butane. I'll give you a copy if you want a copy of it. It was published in 2012. I've got a copy of it, I'll send it to you. And these are the deaths of the age groups that Judge McLean, it came out of an explosion in Moscow, we'll see a picture of that in a minute, and he was asked how many deaths have been in New Zealand. He didn't know. He had to go back through all the records and sort them all out, and came back to the media about a month later and said, well, it was 63, but at the time he thought it was about 30. So these are the deaths, these are at peak again, that same height, the age of risk. These are males, these are females. And you get people our age over here who smoke and inhale from time to time. So what happens when you inhale propane-butane? The biggest thing is the cardiac effects result in death. It just stuffs up your heart's ability to beat properly. It slows down, it gets mixed up, you go into arrhythmia, you've gone to a quiet place to inhale, nobody to help you, and they find your body in the morning. That's the common scenario. There was one in Dunedin recently, or a few months ago now, where they found the body in the morning. It was from Auckland. It came down and they found him in the botanical gardens as an example. What else? Frostbite. You're going from a liquid to a gas. That's how it works. It acts as a propellant. You dissolve your product with the liquid, you spray it, the gas evaporates, and you left the droplets of whatever you want, whether it's fly spray or hairspray or whatever. And so it's going from liquid to a gas. It takes energy out of the environment, and people get frostbite in their tongue, in their lips. You see photos of that. Quite interesting photos, not nice. Okay, then you've got the risk of explosion we had yesterday. Asphyxiation, basically replacing the gas, your air you're breathing with the gas, so you deprive your brain of oxygen. And of course, you run the risk of harming yourself and those of your friends or your highs or quite. Here we go, here's an example of explosion. This is in Mosgiel, my hometown, in Gordon Road. The other end of Mosgiel from where I live, I must hasten to say. 2 teenagers ran into the house in flames after gas bottles, which they were alleged huffing, exploded. And I went down there to be interviewed, and I looked down the ground, there was a pool of blood, and there were all these corns in the blood. What they did was they rolled the bodies to get the flames off them as it came out of the house. Okay? So, inhaled abuse and associated death is a persistent public health problem in New Zealand. Those most vulnerable to abuse and result in death are teenage males. Okay? Education, age restrictions supply, labour and other prevention strategies are required to reduce this risk. And you guys are in a perfect position to hammer these kids the risk they take with these drugs. So, in conclusion, my talk, I'm on time, aren't I? BZP was a precursor. Synthetic cannabinoids came in after those. They can cause a risk of effects on the body. There's a risk of seizures and psychoses. There are no safe alternatives. I don't write that one down for I read it last night too. And establishing low risk now is uncertain. Thank you.
We have 10 minutes. We have 10 minutes for some discussion.
Questions?
Questions, yeah, with Leo. So you can open it up. He's very
I'm
knowledgeable.
here
so
for
you
the duration of the hui, so you can ask me questions. Yeah.
I noticed on your evaluation of where huffing has the list, and I noticed that the majority of you were in the southern region.
That's
so
right.
Is that because you live there, or is that actually because
Well,
it's
that was a quick look and see, and put them together from coroner's reports, etc. You're right. There are most of them, all but one of them are the South Island. You're right. It's a problem throughout New Zealand. Just to have that list happens to be mainly South Island. I don't think it's an issue in the South Island per se when compared to North Island. Though 2 of the 3 explosions that I know of, 2 of the 4 explosions I know of were in the South Island. One was in Blenheim, kids lit it up in the car after they huffed it, the car exploded. And one was in Mosgiel, my hometown.
Do we have any data on kind of the prevalence of it in terms of users or people huffing? So we kind of know the extent of the issue.
I'm not sure, but that's a good question. I can look into that for you. When that explosion occurred in Mosgiel, I remember listening at home. They were interviewing the chief coroner, and he was limited information he had. I'm not sure, but we can look into that. Yeah, I'm not sure what the prevalence is. Yep.
I haven't really got a question, but I have listened to so many clinical people talk about cope up with this topic, and you're the first one that I've really understood exactly what you were talking about.
Oh,
You've empowered me to...
I've done it so many times. When I go to talk, what I do is I sit in the hotel room and I go, so what's my audience? What slides do I use for my audience? If I'm talking to the ED department, I'll put a lot of slides in, the more detailed effects, like the kidney, that sort of stuff.
With the butane canisters, where are they getting them from? Where are the kids getting them from?
As I understand it, they get them from the hardware shops, from your supermarkets, from your dairies. I rang up, I have a bit of a relationship with one of the big supermarket chains in New Zealand, and I rang them up and said, you might have a problem here, you better do something about it. Thanks for telling me that. I'm not sure they can do anything about it or not. But yes, they just buy them, just like synthetics, you know. You go to your hardware shop, you buy the picture I showed you of that canister of butane. You just go to the back sheet.
I just have I don't know if you can answer on this, but talking about we're in a position to make our young people know the risks of huffing. My concern is how do we do that without highlighting to them that there's a really quick, easy, cheap way for them to get high. How do we do that effectively without giving them more information about how to do it and where to get it from?
How do you approach other drugs?
Well, it's different because it's not so readily available in terms of...
Do you talk about the adverse effects with them?
Yeah.
Yeah. Probably...
Because if you say huffing, they're like, if they don't know about it, then you actually have to explain what it is. Okay, so huffing is you, and it's actually effectively telling them how to do it.
You could show pictures of people. There's a great... I debated whether to put a slide, and I took it out in the end. In Korea, there's a big problem in Korea as well. They hire a motel room and they huff up and they have cigarette kaboom. There's a picture of these guys, young Korean guys with their hands up, and all the graphs they have to be treated for the 3rd-degree burns. And those sort of pictures might be able to inform those kids of the risk. That's from the burning side of things, as opposed to the inflammation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm from New Zealand.
Yes.
And we've been tasked to approach this issue of volatile substance abuse with quite some years. Yeah, 6 or 7 years ago, we developed the resources.
Yeah.
the research showed that by targeting the supply side of things is really, really effective in preventing harms from volatile substance abuse. So we've actually developed a resource for retailers, which was actually targeted at KADs taking out and talking to their retailers on not to sell these products, because there's no legal requirement for retailers not to sell these products. However, that is where the young people are getting it from. I know some KADs have done a lot of work on this, like Nadia. Talk to her. She was really, really effective in that regards. So that resource is online. It's volatilesubstances.org.nz/retailers. In the last couple of years, we were tasked to extend this. So it's more of a community focus where communities can actually go out and talk to their communities about it. So not just talking to the retailers, but talking to the young people, talking to the social services about addressing the issue. So on that same website is information that might help you on approaching this issue. I'm not sure if it's not so much targeted at how you actually talk to a young person, but there's some good tips and tools and information in there on also understanding the issue more yourself. So when you do talk to your community, you know what you're talking about as well. Yeah, because it's quite it's a different drug to talk about than the other drugs. So check those websites out, and hopefully they're a good resource for you guys.
Yeah, it is an unusual one as opposed to the other drugs of abuse. Okay, there's loss as well, for example, that is less harmful, but the concern is that these pro-data products are so really available and they kill. There was a time that there was a lot of active pressure on retailers, and they did comply, didn't they, at the
I
time?
know the warehouse keeps all their butane locked away.
Yep.
And I know a lot of my teams was do not sell to young people under the age of 18. There's no legal requirement, but they can have a social moral responsibility to adopt that as a policy amongst their practices.
Yep. Yep.
But the reality of that is they're on the store shelves, and if these kids don't purchase it, they steal it.
But they're not on, some of them aren't on the store shelves.
Some of them are.
Yeah, some of them are. It is a tricky one. Some of them, you know, they're a legal household domestic product in that regards. But the work that we've done with retailers is identifying the key ones, for example, butane, and actually removing it from that. I know the warehouse do it, removing it from that and put it behind the counter. So a staff member actually go get the key and walk and do it. That doesn't solve the issue at all, but it's a step in reducing part of it.
Yeah, there are smaller retailers. You can see them on the shelf there. You just go and buy them.
Yeah, there is. So like in our community, what I did was I talked to all the hardware stores in the community, including the warehouse and my tenant, and asked them if they'd be willing to take on their own moral code, like where they would remove not just butane but other products, either putting them, if they didn't have the capacity, like if they're depending on the store set up to put it behind the counter, to put it in a visible place, or to do any kind of setup that helps reduce the theft rate of those products, including security cameras, visibility at the front counter, those sorts of regular monitoring. One of the countdown and lower hut agreed to tag some of it. We'll also get information from our local A&D councillors on any changes in behaviour. So at one point I was told Lynch was really popular. So we contacted Countdown and they agreed to security tag some of their links and products to prevent the theft of that. So yeah, and I found most retailers were pretty happy to comply. The hard part is getting every single retail outlet in your city that sells their products. There's so many. So we generally respond by community. If there's a rising activity in a particular community, we'll target that particular suburb. It's just manageable stuff.
There is a need for education because it's in the garage at home.
Yeah.
So it is about education is the way to. It's not about just policy. Even I know kids that just do fly spray if they can't do anything. They'll do anything. So it is about education and how you promote it with the scary bits, the blowing up, the stuff you had up there was awesome.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, to talk about Paul. So I'll hand it over to Emma.
That's right. Leo, on behalf of Kate, I just want to say a huge thank you for coming and not only presenting all that wonderful information, but also coming and spending all this time with us and being part of our hobby. So it's been really great that we can sit down and have lunch and all those conversations. And I know everyone found your presentation thoroughly interesting, so I saw lots of cameras up and taking pictures of the slides and all that kind of stuff. So thank you so much. It's been really valuable.
Or any resources I can provide.
Awesome, Leah.
Thank you, Leo. We're actually going to be moving on to our next session, which is Mookie, who doesn't need much of an introduction. So while he's setting up, I'm actually going to get us up because I didn't see anyone kind of nodding off then. So we'll get moving. So what I want you to do is get into pairs, and what we're going to do is a quick little game, and it's all